in the rugged, fog-choked hills of West Virginia. The year was 1874, a time when the Appalachian wilderness still felt ancient, untamed, and older than the country itself. It was here, in the remote outskirts of a small settlement called Harper's Hollow, that whispers began to stir about a boy named Thomas Weaver. At first, the stories were little more than idle gossip passed between farmers at the general store. But as the months passed, the tales darkened. They said Thomas could stop a clock's ticking simply by stepping through a doorway. They said milk would sour if he looked at it too long, and that animals, healthy one day, were found lying stiff and glassy-eyed the next, as though something had stolen the life from them without leaving a mark. Even the air around the Weaver cabin was said to feel heavier, colder, as if the hills themselves recoiled from the boy's presence. Thomas was born on a night that old women in town still shudder to remember. The midwife, a devout woman named Esther Pike, would only say that the moon bled red across the sky as the wind screamed down from the mountains. The boy's mother, Margaret Weaver, claimed her son was sickly from the start, quiet to the point of unnerving. He would spend hours in silence, sitting in a darkened corner, whispering to someone she couldn't see. At first, she thought it was a harmless child's game, but as he grew older, the whispers continued, and there was no playfulness in them, only the steady murmur of words too low for her to understand. By 6, Thomas had never laughed. By 9, he had never cried. And by 12, his pale eyes had taken on a faraway quality, as though he were always looking at something just past your shoulder, something you could never turn fast enough to see. The Weaver family's cabin sat high against a ridge of black rock, with a forest pressed in thick and close. The trail that led there was steep and narrow, the kind only locals dared to take, and even they did so with unease. The land itself seemed wrong, roots twisted above the soil like skeletal fingers, moss growing in strange, spiraling patterns. People swore that on moonless nights, faint shapes moved between the trees, tall, thin figures that swayed as though caught in a wind no one could feel. Margaret rarely came into town anymore, and when she did, she kept her head down, answering questions with short, tight words. Samuel Weaver, Thomas's father, was said to have vanished one winter's night after a loud, deliberate knocking echoed from the woods. Margaret claimed he had gone to trade lumber in a nearby town and never returned, but no one believed that. One crisp autumn evening, 3 hunters returning from the ridge caught sight of Thomas in a forest clearing. The sun had all but disappeared, and the light that remained was that strange, colorless kind that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. Thomas stood barefoot in the damp earth, his clothes thin and worn, his head tilted as if listening to some distant sound. Around him lay a perfect ring of dead leaves, untouched by wind or step, though the air was perfectly still. When the hunters called his name, Thomas turned. What they saw made their stomachs knot. His pale eyes caught the last glint of sunlight and reflected it back like a predator's, sharp and unnatural. That night, one of the hunters was found sitting on his porch, unable to speak, his skin clammy, his hair gone white as winter snow. He died within 3 days without uttering a word. The unsettling stories reached the county doctor, who convinced a traveling man of science, Dr. Edward Alcott, to join him in visiting the Weavers. They arrived to find Thomas sitting in a wooden chair near the hearth, staring fixedly at a charred, blackened patch of wall. He didn't blink when they entered. Dr. Alcott later recorded in his journal that the boy's pulse was faint yet steady, his skin unnaturally cold, and his presence deeply disquieting, as though he were measuring you from the inside out, weighing something about you only he could see. When Alcott raised a small oil lamp to examine the boy's eyes, the flame shivered, dimmed, and then died entirely, leaving the room in darkness. Neither man could get a single word from him. From that day on, Harper's Hollow seemed gripped by a silent dread. Chickens refused to roost, dogs barked at empty spaces, and more than once, the church bell tolled in the middle of the night, its rope found swinging as though freshly pulled. Mothers kept their children indoors after sunset. Men avoided the ridge, crossing themselves when the wind carried strange, low sounds down from the hills. Those who did pass the Weaver place sometimes reported seeing Thomas in the yard, motionless, his gaze locked on the road toward town, as if waiting for someone he knew would come, eventually. The last confirmed sighting of Thomas Weaver occurred in February of 1881 during a blinding snowstorm. A farmer named Elias Boyd, trudging home through knee-deep snow, spotted a thin figure crossing his field. The boy wore only a shirt, no coat, no shoes, yet he seemed unaffected by the cold. Elias called out, but Thomas never turned. He kept walking in a slow, deliberate line toward the tree-line until the storm swallowed him whole. In the morning, Elias went to look for tracks, but the snow was untouched, smooth as glass, as though no one had ever walked there at all. When the Weaver cabin finally collapsed under its own weight years later, a small group of townsmen ventured up the ridge to see what remained. Inside, they found only one thing of note: a rocking chair, moving gently back and forth though there was no wind. On the wall above the hearth, in the same blackened patch where Dr. Alcott had once seen the boy staring, was a single handprint, small, child-sized, burned deep into the wood. No matter how they scraped or sanded, it would not come away. Eventually, the land was sold to a logging company, though workers still swear that tools vanish overnight, saws break without warning, and sometimes, in the dying light of day, they see a pale-eyed boy standing at the edge of the ridge, just watching. No explanation, scientific or otherwise, has ever been agreed upon for the strange case of Thomas Weaver. His name does not appear in official census records after 1880. The locals of Harper's Hollow have their own theory, though few speak it aloud, that Thomas was never entirely human, that something old and hungry wore the skin of a boy for a time, and when it was done with him, it simply returned to the woods. And in the Appalachians, where the mountains hold their secrets close, that thought alone is enough to make even the bravest keep their doors locked after dark.